Kung Fu Panda 4 is okay, and that's not a bad thing at all. I think I say that because it really wasn't a great film at all, but still good enough to the point where I can say I'm just fine with its existence, but just really didn't need it either. Something you might say similar in the case of other extended sequels like Toy Story 4, but also not quite like that in some aspects where it just didn't feel as impactful or necessary once again. A dire warning of this year's slate of movies where most of the studios are just justified in giving us animated sequels that might mostly be pointless just like this one. Again, that's not to say that this film is hateable. It's a fun watch for its target audience, but also not as strong as what films like 2 really brought that further developed the message. Where if I still had to point something out that I really hated about all of this, is the obvious fact of the Awkwafina character in this movie. I pointed out previously that I had much higher hopes for her in this film compared to what she had done with my beloved Disney or whatnot, where it still points something true that pleases me, but still also follows the same generic annoying role she's been playing in every single animated film regardless of Universal or Disney in this conversation. But speaking about this film as a whole and what I just said from before, it really just feels like a vastly disappointing movie from that perspective. Hoping that it would be exciting, which it was for most people who did watch it around me, but just never could deliver on what promise it should have had. A thought where I wanted to be more positive about things when they released compared to later on, but still also knowing that things generally change to be more negative just like what happened right here. Like you could feel that by the fact that the Furious 5 were not in this movie at all, despite what the director tried to say in a way that didn't get much flack, which didn't work for a pointless mention in the film that really isn't worthy of spoiler talk, making it feel less like a Kung Fu Panda movie for what you know, in the characters we just mentioned and the major themes that are a part of it. And of course, the most disappointing fact would also be the villain too in that regard, for what you can expect from this film. From that promise that wasn't actually given in the trailers themselves, not really doing much other than the visual cameos except for Tai Lung to play into the hands of the film's villain that has nothing of what they actually had for Po. It just doesn't feel like that process that was important in his journey as a hero, because this isn't a film that cares much to tell a continuing journey of our hero and more an extension of a brand that people love. And for many, that will actually hurt because of how in the past previous 2 years, DreamWorks has built this great reputation by Puss in Boots alone with what they should expect for films or sequels, something that I should know going back to the start of my own channel, but then shown their painful inconsistent faults throughout the course of the year for what they have been known for since their own beginning with the failure of Ruby Gillman and another typical Trolls movie I couldn't care less for, because its animation still is on par for what you would normally expect from the last Kung Fu Panda. Not too much different by an actual large amount, where it's still great nonetheless for what it is and what you already know, but also still not enough to satisfy a story that promises much more on paper towards the next generation. Like, the idea of moving to the next stage after a trilogy solidified that path for Po really sounds brilliant, but it also decided to trash that by making it more of a fun popcorn movie, with tons of jokes and what you expect out of a kids film that Universal normally produces. I mean, I just don't know what I'm supposed to take away from this or the plan of the future movies if this one decided not to take it or any of its previous trilogies serious at all. This film is just more about let's put back things you loved about the original and make it into an action-packed great time experience at the theater or at home if that's what you prefer. Or you would probably prefer to watch it at home if you don't want to go with family or feel the need to waste your time to watch a kids movie because it's not really that special to be something more anyway. I just generally cannot believe or have any faith that this is a franchise that deserves to have a second trilogy or 6 to 8 films like they planned, because that's nowhere to be seen or heard in any of this. But what is heard in this film is still a good cast regardless, including Awkwafina's character to some degree, where they serve the characters well enough for who they are in some way, or just that very good like Viola Davis, but not actually having a character to really show what can be done. Like Chameleon is just not a great villain at all. And how character is thought of last in what this film is trying to do for its story, and how the story is also next to being finished last, rushing through a surprising fast pace with nothing actually to show for, but still enough to not make you hate it or think anything else like most other sequels I generally cover have made me feel in the past. Because beyond this point, there really isn't much I could say or talk about that I haven't really covered in some form, because it just will circle back to the same point, feeling unimportant in an ever important story of change change and growth. Like, I still cannot believe that you weren't able to tell anything with that because of what everyone has said time and time again with such potential that I was originally excited for. But somehow, even with something as appealing as that, it still cannot pass the curse of the fourth animated movie in most cases, where properties seem to have one extent that they can play before they start circling back into a pattern of unforgiving mediocrity. Even if you made statements in the past that you were going to turn this into a long-living franchise similar to that of Star Wars. It's just come to a point where every major studio is the same now, whether it be Universal or Disney, making movies that extend more than they should for no great reason of actual storytelling other than telling the story of profit. Because that's what they are nowadays, to be the alternative to the other studio that has a theme park or a major blockbuster franchise that they can market every single year for a quarterly earning. Whereas speaking in terms of something that is the same, it was still delightful to hear Hans Zimmer scoring this film from the other films that he did in the past. I mention this fact because I also saw this movie the same weekend as Dune Part 2, a movie that I really love that he also scored that play into the same person who came back that I just said. And I know it's a bit awkward to mention this in this review in regards to two films that don't contrast each other very well, but considering what I mainly do and the algorithm that shuts down any attempts at any other properties to mention for my personal benefit to extend this video, I just wanted to start talking about other films in some way regardless of my standing of my passionate love of Disney or other animated movies from DreamWorks or whatever interests me. Because this is a film I really appreciated for what elements it wanted to do in a story that is developed well enough for its main character's journey and what he has to face with the role he's meant to be from its first part to the second. Where that also is actually a funny statement to add, since Kung Fu Panda 2 is still the best film in the franchise for me that is similar to a lot of other DreamWorks properties still on the main topic, and one that the fourth one just couldn't follow up in some weird way. Where I feel like the main thing I want to mention in this part and about watching Dune Part 2, especially in the sense I saw it in the same day as Kung Fu Panda 4, is how this is a movie that is paced well enough to feel complete in its own way to the previous story rather than something that had an idea but never actually acted upon it. Where the difference between a good and an okay film compared to that of a great one is where you feel like you can take something meaningful from it, that you understand the perspective or feel invested in a world or its story that can live on for a long time, instead of something that you can grow up liking at first and then seeing more faults within the story from time and time that just isn't connectable to you anymore. But again, these are two different films where it's always to each their own, but also shows how much I love something more than what the world I built in the corner of my channel as of course I come to grow. That sometimes it's always good to broaden our horizons about things as we grow in the world, because our interests usually change as we grow up, and that is the case as seen now for a franchise I once loved but don't feel like I enjoy anymore with films that continue on past their prime. So moving back to the main subject at hand is where I would like to end things again on a positive note compared to my past, where yes, films like Kung Fu Panda 4 has already proven once again that the sequel usage by any studio are just utterly pointless and are just made mostly for profit, where we shouldn't expect much along the way with the other upcoming films, but how we should deserve better films from that can actually make a great experience. That sequels still can be enjoyable film as much as the last if it has something to tell in its story to the progression of the hero that connect with our own real selves just as much as what I saw, contrasting with the likes of these two. Where it also isn't a thing that can be bad either. Not hateable, but also not enough to be lovable compared to the likes of Puss in Boots to separate that meaning while also still being a good time. A night and day difference between the two franchises by the same studio of what you can do versus what you should do for profit. That you can add more to a character in the next step of a progressive journey despite what was already built that could be satisfying if something is worth telling. I mean, thinking about it now, Shrek Forever After is probably the best fourth animated movie if you still think the third is worth continuing. I mean, it's not the best or the greatest, but it still is, you know, a decent sequel watch on its own. And I guess beside that, I'm all done, so goodbye.